How's it going, everybody? So, as soon as you guys can see and hear me, let me know how the quality is. Live streams are always interesting. There's usually technical difficulties. So, how are you guys doing? Happy Armageddon, everybody. So, my goal for our little chat is to have you guys bring in some questions. I can do my best to answer those. We can talk about pretty much anything. It's kind of crazy times that we're in right now with all of this coronavirus stuff. A lot of us living in quarantine, and I imagine a lot of you guys are like me in the fact that you prefer to be outside, not stuck inside, especially in the springtime. It's especially painful when the weather starts to get nice to be stuck inside. So looks like we're looking and sounding okay. How's it going? Indiana, Dallas, Texas, Cornwall, UK. Looks like follow the lighter. Bought all my coursework the other day and almost done with it. Awesome. That's a lot of material to get through. Thank you for picking those up. Hello from Iceland. How's it going, Gunnar? 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 Is it Gunnar or Gunnar? I bet it's Gunnar. Halfway, Oregon. Good to see you guys. Yeah, so I'm living in quarantine. I live in Washington State, and aside from New York State, Washington State I believe so, has the most cases of the virus. And so we are currently on a stay-at-home request where we're supposed to stay at home, stay safe, and not go out unless we absolutely need to. Lewiston, Idaho, you're close, man. Melbourne, Australia, University Place, Washington, Colorado, California, Michigan. A lot of people here. Yeah, so I'm trying to do my best to stay at home. And one of the interesting topics that I kind of wanted to talk about was, talking about the ethics of going out and doing landscape photography right now, even though it's really easy to practice social distancing while doing landscape photography. I know I've been asking myself this question: am I going to be going out and shooting during this lockdown period? It's not a lockdown, but we're still supposed to stay at home. He said that we can go out and we can, exercise and go on walks and go on short drives and stuff, but we're supposed to be staying home as much as possible unless it's a necessity to leave, like grocery stores and so forth. While I know that I could practice social distancing while I go out, I know that I'm a slightly different case because I'm kind of a public figure. I'm worried that if I go out and I do landscape photography and I share it on social media of some kind, there's going to be other people that see me go out, and then they go out, and then people will end up congregating in landscape photography places, and they'll be going to state parks where there's not supposed to, there's nobody working at the state parks, and there's not supposed to be people congregating at those things. I'm just worried that I will create a domino effect if I go out and do landscape photography. So what I would like to know from you guys is, those of you that live in areas that have a stay at home or don't go out order, are you planning on trying to go out and do photography during this time, or are you just going to stay home? I think the choice that I've made for myself is that I'm going to stay home, just because I feel like I need to set a good example rather than create a wave of photographers thinking that it's okay for them to go out as well, and then they end up going to the same places as other people. You see where I'm going with that. Yeah, so we got a bunch of questions coming in. People that recently picked up my course. Thank you, AJ. Greetings from Atlanta. They shut down national parks in California. I think they shut down national parks everywhere, from what I understand. Scott says, stay at home, set an example. I agree with you, Scott. I feel like I kind of have to hold myself to some slightly higher standards just because I'm so visible. I want to be setting a more conservative example rather than going out and doing something that might cause a whole bunch of other people to go out and do it as well. There's going to be people go out and do photography anyways, but I don't want it to be because I did it, if that makes sense. Currently avoiding all unnecessarily travel, says Darren. I totally agree. George says, too scared, I'll get arrested. I'm in Virginia. There's that too. I mean, it's hard to convince a person that, if a police officer was to see you out, with a tripod and taking photographs of a sunset or something, it's hard to convince them that it's a necessary, trip that you're on. I feel like it's just not worth it. I'm going to use this time to sit at home, process old photos, and hopefully create a whole bunch of content for you guys, because I know that there's going to be a lot of people at home that are incredibly bored right now. So I'm going to try to use this time to to spend time doing what I typically don't have time to do. For a lot of people, a lot of us don't have spare time at all usually. So it's a great time to, spend time learning or just catching up on stuff that you normally don't have the time to do. Live an hour from Lake District and the weather is great, but I'll be staying at home. Good job, Greg. Hello from Italy. Yeah. Luca, I don't blame you for being stuck at home. Italy is getting hit really hard, especially northern Italy, from what I understand. Eugene, Oregon, we're sticking close to home. Colorado Springs. Yeah, it's tough. So if you guys have any questions, why don't you start hitting me with them? Maybe open your comment with question and then say the question just so I can tell, because as we get more and more people in here, I'm going to start needing a moderator because it's kind of nuts when the chat room is going off. But Max says, I was thinking about golfing thinking about golf as the perfect activity to do during all of this. Now the courses are all closing. Yeah, Max, the golf course that I'm a member at, I thought I was going to be able to still go out and play, and just walk the course. And even if they took the pins out, be no big deal, I thought. But we're not going to be allowed to do that. I think there's golf courses and places like that. There's liability risks. If somebody gets sick while they're there during a time when they were supposed to be closed, but they let people on anyway, there's some, insurance liability issues there, I think. Starting to go through my awesome tutorials. Never knew the power of post-processing. Thank you. Yeah, so for those of you guys that don't know, the reason there's so many comments coming in about my tutorials is because they're all half off right now. I put all my tutorials on sale just to try to help with the boredom. So for 50% off, I think if the offer code is this too shall pass with no spaces, all my tutorials are on sale right now for those that are interested in that. If you're looking for something to do, that's something you can do. Let's see. My job is in retail and home improvement, necessary business. So you're going to work, Rob. Have I seen everyone packed in the stores? Why not photography? Just keep your distance. It's a fair point. I feel like if a person is going to get sick, it's most likely going to happen at a grocery store, because how are they possibly going to keep everything disinfected? Yeah, it's just, I feel sorry for the people working in grocery stores because they have to see so many faces per day. How are those people not going to get sick? Do some photo editing from time to time. Yep. I shot the cherry blossoms in DC the day before they shut it down. Way too many people. I can only imagine. That's the problem with, saying that you're going to go out and do photography, is if you do anything seasonal, if you go to a wildflower bloom area, you're going to run into people. It's easy to say that you're going to practice social distancing, but you know how it is. As landscape photographers, we end up all congregating in the same places. So it's funny. I have what do they call it? Super chat, where you can pay for a comment. And somebody has just super chatted me. Why is eye contact so intense and weird during intimacy? I don't know, man. It just is. That's funny that that's my first super chat, but I will respect the super chat. Yeah. How am I taking advantage of the lockdown for developing farther as an artist? That's a great question. For me, like my first instinct is to, as a creative person, I have to think about the financial part of this. As a workshop leader and a tutorial, an instructor of photography is not going to be a priority in people's lives for a while. And as the economy, trends downward for a while, it's going to be people like me that get hit really hard. So I've been stressing financially. I'm okay for now, but looking forward, I'm definitely thinking a bit about my business and, the hit that tourism has taken lately in all of what's going on. It illustrates the problem with the workshop leader business model, because I know a lot of other photographers that are out there right now, they're getting hit really hard. The people that have paid for hotels and, flights and all of that. And when everybody starts canceling, it can be financially devastating. And if I didn't also sell tutorials and those things, I would be in very, very deep trouble. But I think it's going to be tutorial sales, luckily for me, that gets me through this rough patch. But there's a lot of people that are not in that situation. So the first thing that I'm thinking of is like, I'm going to use this time to like analyze my business model, because at no point have I had any kind of doomsday clause in any of my workshop, return policies. And how do I handle this time? I'm using it as an opportunity to look at my business and be like, what do I need to change? Because I was not prepared for any of this. As far as furthering as an artist, it's a great opportunity for me to start going back through older photos and photo shoots that honestly I did but never processed. It's a great time for me to go back and like actually slow down enough to go through some of the photos, because someone like me, I actually do a lot of so many shoots that I don't end up processing photos from all of those shoots, because I get out and shoot so much. I'm like, it wasn't epic, whatever. And then I move on. Now is a perfect opportunity for me to be like, okay, it wasn't epic, but can I still make something of this? So it's a great time for me to go back and reanalyze photos I've taken. Got a couple super chats that came in. Shane says, have I ever considered one-on-one consulting paid by the hour? I used to do that. I used to offer Skype sessions. I think back then I was doing them at $75 for an hour. And what I would do is I would take that person's photos, I would work through them, answer all their questions, and I would record the whole thing. If all of this goes on long enough, I might go back to that. But recording tutorials for me has just been a more efficient use of my time, because there for a while I had so many people wanting Skype sessions, I just couldn't physically do them all. And then next super chat is, if I had a talking pet shark, what would I tell it? Dude, that's funny. I don't know what I would tell it. Let's see. John says, I will spend some time re-editing some photos and playing with Photoshop. That's a great thing. I mean, there's, right now the obvious answer of what people can be doing is they can be practicing their post-processing. And you don't have to buy tutorials in order to practice it. What you need to do is just put some reps in. Go find some of those photos from the past that you had good conditions on. We all have those shoots that we remember. Go back to some of those and give it another try. Reprocess some of those older photos. We're not going to be creating any new photos, but we can go back and revisit some of those old shoots and hopefully come away with better stuff. Let's see. Here in the K, we're told not to leave the house unless it's a very specific circumstance. Already seeing videos of UK-based YouTubers that feel it's okay to travel for photography. And there's going to be a lot of that. It's a problem, and I don't want to contribute to that problem. All I can say is that we just have to all try to lead by example. Let's see, Moise, I don't know how to say your name. Thinking of switching to Sony body, but I have a lot of Canon glass. What adapters are good? So there's two adapters. There's two main adapters that you would look at. Either the Sigma MC11, which is pretty good, and the Metabones adapter, which is also pretty good. My suggestion to you would be if you're thinking about switching from Canon to Sony right now, I would hold off, because you want to see what this Canon R5 is all about. There's a chance that you might be able to get a really killer camera body and still use some of your Canon glass. So for those that are thinking about switching from Canon to Sony right now, don't do it. Just hold off, be patient, see what happens, because that R5 looks pretty sweet. Question, how did the F4 group get started? Gavin Hardcast. Well, so I've known Thomas for, I don't know, a couple of years now, something like that. We first met we were both teaching at a photography conference. We taught both out of Acadia and out of Moab. And then out of Moab, Gavin Hardcastle was also there. And Gavin and Tom became friends. And I really liked Gavin's channel, and I was friends with Tom. And Gavin had been shooting a lot with Adam, and I was also a fan of Adam's channel. So Gavin invited us all to Canada, and we just all went and showed up. And that was the first time we ever hung out, were those Canadian Rocky videos. So that was how it got started. We all had so much fun, we wanted to do it again. Chris is from Atlanta, working at home harder than at the office. Yes, working at home, you always work for a jerk. It's hard to stay on task at home. Question, how about trying some macro photography? That's an excellent suggestion, Kevin. That's something that I've been thinking about doing. And it's something that you can literally do just like in your backyard. Find a cool spider, get down on the ground, do some macro photography. I think it's a great way to get out of any creative block when you're forced into doing something that you don't normally do. Let's see. Skid asks, do I prefer big waves or smaller ones for ocean shoots? Depends on the situation. Most times, I mean, the obvious answer is, oh, bigger the better. Sometimes the big waves are not the photogenic ones. Sometimes it's the smaller ones, but there's that sweet spot in there. Every shoot is totally different. I like the waves to be large enough that they have that sense of impact, that sense of gravitas, but not so large that the ocean just becomes a messy, disgusting mess. Let's see. Question, what are my thoughts on the Polar Pro Summit filter system? They're good, but I would only recommend it for people that always use graduated filters or use graduated filters a lot. I think that if you are lucky enough to have just thread-on filters, you should just stick with round filters. And if you're somebody that doesn't use graduated filters, you exposure blend, just stick with circular screw-on filters, either from Polar Pro, the quartz line is good, or from Breakthrough Photography. They're just so much more efficient size-wise. It's just a better way to go. So I still push people towards thread-on filters, but if you're a graduated filter user, the Polar Pro system seems to be like the nicest right now, honestly. Like Lee is good, but the filters themselves just have so much color cast. I would never use Lee. And the Polar Pro stuff, the way it's framed, the mounting system, it's pretty slick. So yeah. Let's see. Gunner asks, just got 2 amazing new lenses and a 5D, digging them, trying them out. For art's sake, how would I go about applying a fade to a photo, either in Lightroom or Photoshop? So applying a fade, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong on what you mean by that. If you mean creating kind of a matte effect. Is that what you're talking about? Where you're kind of clipping the blacks? Most times I do that effect using the curves layer. You just grab the left bottom point of the curve on the RGB curve, and you drag it up, and that will not allow the blacks to go all the way to black anymore. And that's how you create that kind of matte effect. Let's see. Question: best lens to fill my 35 to 100 gap. Is it still 24 to 105? 24 to, it depends on the system, Dave. If on the Sony side, I love the 24 to 105. Actually, the Canon newer 24 to 105 is pretty good. Depends on the camera brand, honestly. Sony, definitely 24 to 105. Bill says we can go out for exercise in Philly. So did a few close-up shots of cherry trees and blossom. Yep. And that's a way of getting around not being able to go out to big epic places to shoot. Just start shooting some smaller scenes. Maybe it's time to get artsy fartsy and start photographing some, abstract leaf photos or something. We have a super chat from Chad. He says, what about an online post-processing live workshop? That's a great idea. Kind of like this, only where everyone would pay for said time. It's a great idea, Chad. Something that I had to put on the back burner that I was really bummed about was Sean Bagshaw and I were going to lead a post-processing boot camp where it was going to be 50 people, and it was going to be a weekend long of nothing but, Photoshop training. And it was going to be really intense. And I was going to do one of those in Seattle with Sean, and then another one on the East Coast with Greg Benz. And now doesn't look like it's going to happen this year. Maybe it will have to be later in the year, but that's an idea, Chad. Maybe Sean and I could get together for that. Let's see. Joy asks, question: when I shoot long exposures at the beach, what ND filter and settings do I use? So when shooting moving water, every shot is different. How's that for a cop-out? Every scene kind of has its shutter speed sweet spot. Hold on a second. I got the plague. Don't bother me. Don't mind me. Every scene kind of has its sweet spot shutter speed that I'm going for. So a lot of times it's between that half second and a fifth of a second. So I determine what shutter speed looks best, and then I figure out how to get there. So a lot of times I don't even need an ND filter to get to that target shutter speed. But if I'm unable to get there with settings that are desirable, meaning not having to stop down beyond like f16 and being able to use a reasonable ISO, then I'll go completely without an ND filter. But if I can't get there without desirable settings, then I will typically throw on a 3-stop. A lot of times that gets me the shutter speed I'm looking for. If it's a really, really long shutter speed that I'm looking for, it's usually because the water movement is not adding to the scene. I want to completely eliminate the water and turn the water into fog or smoke. Then I almost always reach for a 10-stop and try to get, if I'm going for that completely calm, completely smoky water look, then I'm typically going for an exposure that is longer than a minute. So if you go beyond a minute, everything's kind of the same. So I try to get to that 1.5-minute mark or so. So yeah. Let's see. All the leader says, how do I deal with exposure blending with panos that were bracketed? Do I merge different exposures first, or do I blend to multiple? Okay, so you have a panorama that was also a high dynamic range scene. The way you deal with that is you in the field, first of all, you set up a 3-shot bracket or a 2-shot bracket, make sure you got that whole dynamic range. You start on the bright side of your image, you bracket your shots, then you turn, bracket your shots, turn, bracket your shots. Do that all the way across. And then the way I post-process those, this is the only time I ever do this, I will grab all of those images, and then I will right click in Lightroom, and then I'll go to Photo Merge HDR Panorama. And what that'll do is it'll take that entire dynamic range of all of those bracketed shots and stick it into a panorama file. So you'll get the panorama stitch, but you'll also have the full dynamic range of that. So I'll take that DNG that it spits out, and then I will open that up inside of Photoshop as a smart object. That way, this sounds more complicated than it is. Then I can duplicate or create a new smart object via copy from that original smart object. And I'll have one version for my sky where I just bring down the exposure, and then one version for my shadow information. I'll brighten that up, and then I'll exposure blend those together. The reason you want to do it that way is because if you try to stitch it, all the dark ones as a panorama with all the bright ones as a panorama and then exposure blend those together, most times a program is not going to stitch a panorama the same way twice. So stuff won't line up. So you're better off to just take the whole thing and stitch them to an HDR panorama and then open that up as a smart object. Whew. Some things are way harder to explain verbally than to just show. Let's see. Question, Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes trip. I've actually never heard of that place. I should check that out. Sounds cool. Northwest Michigan. The only place I've been in Michigan is Detroit. So yeah. Did we lose? How is the video quality looking to you guys? I just got a notification saying that I'm not getting smooth streaming. I'm going to just kind of catch up here. Getting choppy video, same. You guys let me know how the video is looking. I'm going to try to stay current. Getting choppy video. Stupid, unreliable internet. It's that time of day when... better now? Is it better? It looks better on the stream, so it looks a little fuzzy, but sorry. Let me go. Was a little laggy. Better now? Okay, I'll go back to questions here. Let's see. How do I see my photography evolving from where it is now? I mean, you're pretty much mastered Photoshop and composition. Well, honestly, I feel like, and this is from Julio, honestly, I feel like I'm in a slump with my photography. I feel like I plateaued, and now I'm just at that part where I haven't improved in a while, and it drives me nuts. And the reason I haven't improved in a while is because I don't get to shoot just for myself much anymore. I'm always leading a workshop, and that's no way to practice and to get better. I spend more time talking about photography than actually getting to do it. And it kind of sucks, honestly, but first world problems. So for me, I just need to get out and shoot more just for myself. And I think that where I can improve the most is not necessarily post-processing anymore. I just need to get better at shooting in the field and composition. And I feel like with my own compositions that I've been shooting, I've really mastered the super simple composition. Like I'm really good at isolating an object and making a simple shot from a chaotic scene. But what I'm not good at is making a more complex scene work. Like take that simple subject and expand it into a more complex composition that still works. That's what I'm working on. I want to be able to photograph a more complex scene, but still have it function and work. So that in the field is where I need to improve next. What lens do I use for astrophotography? Great channel. Thank you, Brian. So I don't have it in here, but I have a 24 millimeter f1.4 from Sony. That's my main astro lens now. I either use that or the one that I'm filming with right now, which is a Zeiss Batis 18 millimeter f2.8. But my 24 f1.4 is my main astro lens right now. One moment. Another question. Great artists strive to establish their own signature style in terms of post-processing and color palette. What would be a Nick Page signature style? Interesting. I don't know. I think that's one of those things that other people can tell you more easily than you can tell yourself. For me, I try to have things stay in the realm of possibility. Like I like my images to be stylized, but not cartoony and over the top, over edited. I like my stuff to be dramatic, but not overly so. And I like my compositions to be simple and have a good visual path. I find myself shooting into the sun a lot and having like bright highlights and deep shadows in my images a lot, just because it helps composition. So I think, if you look at somebody like me compared to somebody like an Adam Gibbs or a Thomas Heaton, Adam and Tom, they tend to shoot in much flatter light conditions and they shoot away from the sun or away from the light source. I tend to shoot towards it. And that's kind of the funny thing about shooting with them is I'll be pointing this way and they'll be pointing this way. And we come away with completely different images. But I guess that would be how I would describe myself. Do I ever crop 16:9? Yeah, I'm totally open to cropping to any aspect ratio. I always crop to the photo and to the composition rather than trying to squeeze a composition into a specific aspect ratio, because I don't care about consistency as far as aspect ratios in my work. I just try to make every photo as good as I can. Planning on macro, good call. Let's see, we got Professor Internet PhD question. Smaller question to the follow to that of follow the leader. Don't know if this has been answered, but how do you go about processing a single image that has focus stacking as well as exposure blending? So a focus stack exposure blend in one image, what is the workflow? Let me take a drink. Okay, so if you have a high dynamic range scene that you also need to focus stack, what you do, we'll start within the field. I will start off focusing close to camera with my bright exposure. And by bright, I mean that the shadows are off the left edge of the histogram. Not overly bright, just enough to where the shadows are as bright as I would ever need them to be, but not ridiculously bright. So I will focus close to camera. I'll focus a little bit deeper in, until I get back to infinity or the background of the image. And then also keeping in mind that I use back button focus, so I can take multiple shots without refocusing. So I will focus back on the horizon, and then I will speed up my shutter speed, darken down my exposure until I get all of my highlights to where I get the right side of the histogram off the edge. And then I will take that shot while I'm still focused in infinity. That means that those two shots that are focused to infinity are going to line up perfectly because there isn't any focus breathing there. So I'll bring all of those photos into Photoshop. I will start with my background, my sky part of the shot, and I will exposure blend in the sky, right? So now we have the background of our image has been exposure blended. I will create a merge visible layer of how that's looking. And then I will take all the photos for my focus stack and that merge visible layer. I will align them to combat the focus breathing that happened. So everything's aligned. And then I will take those and I will focus stack it. I'll just go edit, auto blend layers. So the most important thing to keep in mind with that is that you need to exposure blend first. The reason you need to exposure blend first is because if you let Photoshop auto align things, it's going to most likely screw up the alignment of your background. And if you have a very detailed horizon line, let's say you have a tree breaking the horizon, it's almost guaranteed Photoshop will screw that up. So you want to exposure blend before Photoshop has had its opportunity to get its hands on the alignment of stuff. Because once it does, it's going to screw it up. Sounds more difficult than it is, but exposure blend, then focus stack. Makes me sound so smart when I say this stuff, but it's really not that difficult. Let's see. Question. Have I seen Alistair Ben's channel? He uses the history brush technique to edit. Powerful stuff. I actually haven't. And you're not the first person to bring up the history brush technique that he uses. It makes me want to go check it out because the history brush is not something that I use like ever. Tanner says, question, how would I describe good light? I was out shooting with cloud coverage the other day, thinking it was looking good, but it was also flat. Is flat light good? Tanner, I think you sent me an email about this. Did I ever get back to you? Anyways, I'm sorry if I didn't get back to you, but this is ringing the bell, the Cape Kiwanda thing. I saw your email. Anyways, so good light. Good light is just a general term for whatever the person is into, because good light can be many things. For example, if good light, if you're into astrophotography, would be a totally clear day. Good light is just a general term that doesn't really mean anything. Typically, what people mean by good light is light that benefits whatever scene they're shooting. So let's say, like the image that you sent me, Tanner, let's say that you have a sandstone cliff with an overcast sky with kind of blue, moody clouds. It could be good light, but typically what you're looking for with those larger vistas is going to be light interacting with your foreground, because as that light streams through and rakes across the landscape, it's going to create depth and dimension. So if you take that same heavy cloud cover scene with, those dark clouds, but add a little bit of side light, if the light would have peeked underneath those clouds and raked across your scene, that would have been beautiful light, because then it's introducing contrast. And what that scene would need is that contrast. Plus, because it's a sandstone cliff, you're going to have the warm tones contrasting against the blue tones. You're going to have that color contrast that will really set that scene off. Typically, when I'm saying something like, this is such good light, or, when I'm talking about good light, I'm typically meaning a scene that has nice cloud cover. So it's got sky interest, but it also has light interacting with the landscape and creating depth and dimension in it. That's typically what I mean by good light. But good light could also mean just a big colorful sunset. Light is typically whatever is happening from the horizon up, and the main thing to know is that there's no such thing as good light. Good light, the term good light is just a made up term for whatever the person likes. Let's see. Let's see. Thanks, Nick. Setting a good example by staying home. When I shoot a focus stack, do I shoot front to back or back to front? How many images? So a lot of times I just focus close to camera and then deeper. So I usually start close, go far away. And when I'm in between images, I take a shot of my hand so I know that that is a separate focus stack set, right? How many images totally depends on how close you are to your closest subject and your focal length. So if you're shooting with a 16 millimeter lens and the closest thing isn't for 5 feet, 2 images is plenty, because a wide angle lens is going to have a greater depth of field just by the physics of it. But the longer that focal length, let's say I'm shooting that same scene only with a 50 millimeter lens, I'm going to have a much shallower depth of field just because of the physics of that longer focal length. So rather than needing 2 images, I could need 6. So it totally depends on your focal length and how close the closest thing is to that camera. So it's one of those things that you just kind of need to practice. And it depends on what settings you're shooting. If you're trying to get away with f8, you're going to need more images in order to create that deeper depth of field that you need to get everything sharp from front to back, because the plane of focus is so much shallower. The depth of field is shallower with that more open aperture. So it depends. That's the honest answer. But it's one of those things that you just have to play with and practice with before you know, because you got to learn from experience. Let's see. What do you do when I'm not absorbed in photography? I golf a lot, so I love golf. Lately, I've been nerding out on my pickup. So I just put a roof rack on my pickup, installed it by hand, and I've just been working on it. That's about it. Hang out with my kid. Used to play a lot of music, but I don't play as much anymore. I do miss it though. Do I do affiliate links? I understand it's not a huge income, but it's something. Yeah, I do. So I add affiliate links to most of my videos. Anytime, like, it's a vlog, I list all of my gear that I use. Like, this is my tripod, this is my camera, and all of those are affiliate links. And I get a little bit from Amazon a month, but it's not much. It's usually enough to like buy something at the end of the month. Darren says, firstly, huge inspiration. So thanks for that. Thank you. Should I focus more on photography or the YouTube videos I make about them? In other words, grow as a photographer or grow as a photography vlogger first? Grow as a photographer first. My biggest rant coming. My biggest pet peeve is that YouTube is littered. It's full of people pretending to be more knowledgeable about things than they actually are, and I like to think that I learned how to do photography before I started talking like I knew what I was talking about. I think that everybody should focus on their craft first and then let everything come organically and naturally after that. I don't think that the right way to go about anything is to seek the acknowledgement. How to word this? You gotta be good at your craft first, and then whatever happens after that happens. The only way to truly set yourself apart at anything is to be good at it. And there's a lot of people that try to fake it till they make it. And to me, I don't think anything good or honest will ever come from faking it till you make it. I think that you should practice your craft and get really good at it before, starting to speak knowledgeably about it. And I know that there's probably a whole bunch of people that are mad listening to that. I just think that the only way a person will ever set themselves apart is to actually be good at what they do and to do it slightly differently than other people do it. There's no good comes from being just a copycat. People don't buy expensive tickets to go watch a cover band. They buy expensive tickets to go watch an original band. I always throw it back to music, but cover bands play in dive bars and original bands play in stadiums. And so I encourage everybody to focus on being original and being good, and the acknowledgement will come later. There's my rant. I'm done. I'm sorry. Let's see. Let's see. What is more important, getting to know a location or traveling to a new location? I feel like, and that's from Aaron, I think that it has to be a combination of the two, right? So for me, I feel most inspired and most excited to do photography when I'm seeing something new, because that's really when I fully appreciate how beautiful something is. But I also feel like I do my most creative, contemplative photography when I'm returning to a location over and over and over. But there is definitely a limit to how many times I can go to a place and feel inspired. So like my local area, it takes special conditions for me to feel inspired typically. So it needs to be a blend of the two. You need to introduce a new location occasionally, but return to that location multiple times before you ever say, "Oh, I'm done with that." Because I know lots of photographers that they just check places off their little list, off their little bucket list. Like, "Oh yeah, I've done Yosemite and I've done this place and I've, you know, done this place." And you can't ever do a place. That person hasn't explored all the possibilities of that place. They're just treating everywhere like a postcard. So to grow as a photographer, you need to return to a location over and over, because you really grow by forcing yourself to go beyond the obvious shot. But at the same time, as a creative person, in order to be motivated to continue to do photography, you need to occasionally introduce yourself to something that is inspiring and exciting, I think. It's kind of okay. If we're going to throw this back to music, it's like, in order to be good at a song, you have to play it over and over and over. But in order to feel creatively satisfied, you need to write more than one song, right? You gotta occasionally write something new. You can't just play the same song over and over. Playing the same song over and over will make you better at that song, but occasionally you need to play some different music. And sometimes you got to completely change genres, otherwise you get burnt out on whatever that genre is. I don't know if that makes any sense. Let's see. Do I often use layers such as fogs, clouds, birds on my photos? Many landscape photos seem to do it and make it a lot more dramatic. What do I recommend? So I never fake anything. That's a pretty strong statement. Okay. I will not fake a sky. I won't drop in a fake sky. I won't fake light that didn't actually happen. And I won't fake birds that weren't actually there. Having said that, I will, like if I'm shooting a seascape, I will set up, I'll take the seascape image, hold my composition, speed up, change my settings so I can freeze a bird in flight, speed up my shutter speed, increase my ISO, capture that bird in flight, and then add one or two birds from those faster shutter speeds to the slower shutter speed landscape. I don't feel that that's cheating as much as it is like shutter speed stacking, right? Because, that's the way I experienced the scene. I'm not just totally making something up. I'm just trying to convey what I saw and what I experienced when I took the photo. But I'm not going to, drop in a moon from a completely different night or a completely different focal length or clouds that weren't actually there. Because to me, the funnest part of photography is the chase. I love chasing conditions and chasing, trying to make it all line up and happen at the same time. And if I start faking stuff like that, it totally undermines the excitement of the chase. I want people to actually believe the things that I create, the photos that I make, because for me, that's part of the story. I went to this place and experienced this awesome sunset. Finally, it took me 5 times, but I finally saw a great sunset. That's a big part of the excitement for me, so I'll never fake that stuff. I will, however, embellish things that happened because to me, my mind is, really focused on the way that the light is bouncing off those rocks. And so I might embellish it a little bit more than the camera saw it because that's the way my brain saw it because I was really focused on that. So yeah, that's my take on that, I guess. Jeff asks, grad filter versus exposure blending. How do I decide which technique to use? I pretty much always only exposure blend because since I know how to exposure blend, I choose to never travel really with graduated filters unless I'm like testing something, honestly, because graduated filter you cannot undo and exposure blend you can always undo. You can always redo that exposure blend until you get it right. And if you can't get it right now, maybe 5 months from now when you're more practiced at it, you will be able to. There are times when Grad filters work better than exposure blending. If you have that perfectly flat horizon line, got a nice two-stop, soft graduated filter, it might be exactly what you need, and then you're not going to have to deal with any movement issues along your horizon line. There are those times. Most times, though, I would much rather exposure blend than use a grad filter. Let's see. Do I do or PhotoGill asks, do cityscapes interest me? Not as much. Mostly because I'm more excited by nature than I am by human creations, I guess. The hand of man doesn't excite me as much unless it's like really old historical stuff. That stuff interests me. I would love to go to Rome and photograph, the Colosseum and things like that, but not necessarily, a New York skyline or anything like that. Kino asks, hey Nick, I know dodging and burning is one of my techniques, but I find more control possibly due to my own experience in masking and levels. What are the benefits of dodging and burning over the alternative? So what they're asking is, why dodge and burn using like a new layer with the blend mode change to soft light rather than using a contrast layer and then just matte and then using a layer mask to bring it in places? The main difference is, well, there's several differences. But the main one is that you can, first of all, work in color. So for example, let's say that you have a foreground that has rocks and leaves and whatever, and then you have a little bit of light streaming in from your horizon. You can, if you're using a dodge burn layer, you can actually incorporate some of that daylight color into those objects on the foreground. It's not going to completely paint over them, but it is going to work a little bit of that in. So if you're emulating the way light interacts with a foreground, it's going to make the final result a little bit more harmonious color-wise. If you just use like a levels layer, sorry. If you just use a levels layer, all you're going to be doing is amplifying the colors that are already there. So I find that you can actually create a lot more color harmony by choosing a color and then dodging and burning. Also, it's really touchy sometimes if you're trying to, let's say, brighten with a levels adjustment, which I do from time to time. It's a lot more touchy to try to only brighten the highlights but not deepen the shadow areas. I just find that I have way more control when I'm dodging and burning, especially dodging and burning through a luminosity selection. That's when it's really powerful. In some ways it's tomato for sure, but I find that dodging and burning is just way more subtle and controlled than using contrast. There's a long answer. Frank says, dang it, I recently bought my tutorials at a normal price. When did you pick those up, Frank? Send me a message. Chris says, question, am I binge watching Netflix? I suggest Ozark. I actually haven't been watching a lot of TV. I've been trying really hard to stay productive. So I'm trying to stay away from just watching TV endlessly. So I've been trying to work on some F4 material and work on YouTube and then record a podcast a day and answer emails, working on that stuff. Plus I did a lot of sprucing up of the office and that stuff. Let's see. Oh man, I'm falling way behind. Yeah, way behind here. Do I try to do more wildlife than when I'm out and about? Yeah, I actually try to do a fair bit of wildlife just because it keeps me going out. And a lot of times, especially in my area, this time of year, when up until this time of year, when the skies are not great, there's not great landscape photography to be done, but there is quite a bit of wildlife. Do I like Raya Pro 4? So with luminosity mask creation panels, I prefer Lumenzia still. I actually haven't tested out the the newest Raya Pro yet, but it seems overkill, honestly. And then there's TK Actions. TK Actions is powerful, but again, it just has too much of stuff that I don't use in it. I prefer Lumenzia because it's more compact, it's very fast, and it's just efficient space-wise. It doesn't have a whole bunch of stuff that I don't use in it, which I like. Let's see. Lauren says, I live in the Pacific Northwest and I would love to get more experience with night sky photography. Do I know of any local photog groups? By the way, I love your work. So where at in the Pacific Northwest are you? There's multiple photo clubs like in the Vancouver and Portland area, if you're over there. Yeah, there's definitely lots of photography groups, but there's also lots of just like smaller groups that I kind of like better in a way, because if you can just find a set of like 5 friends to go out and shoot with, that's way better. Melvin says, Nick, I'm a legend. Love the page. Thank you, man. Julio says, question, what would be your ultimate achievement in photography or as a photographer? I don't know. I've kind of been thinking more about like what, the what's next question. For me, I get lots of acknowledgement on YouTube as being a good photographer, but I feel like to feel like I'm a legitimately good photographer, I want to sell more prints. And I think a lot of people can relate with that. Like seeing people appreciate your art in a print form is probably the most gratifying way of being acknowledged, I think, as a photographer. So I would really like to have a successful gallery of some kind. And I feel like that is something that I really want to strive towards. Yeah. Let's see. I've fallen behind again. Have I tried Affinity Pro? Yeah, I tried it, and it's very similar to we're talking about the ADP panel, right? Affinity. No, no, I have not tried that actually. Sorry. I need more caffeine. It's hard to keep going for this long, Do I star guide or use a manual stack? Mark, so talking about noise reduction for astrophotography, I typically don't do anything fancy. I take a sky image and typically a long exposure for my foreground. Maybe I'll focus stack that or light paint it, and I call it good. I don't do any kind of star tracking or anything like that. Let's see. Question, just installed Lumenzia. Do I prefer marching lines on or off? I always leave them off. Sometimes it's nice just to see them to know that they're there, but I always leave them off. Let's see. So if I use a light pollution filter, do I change the white balance? My pictures turned out blue. Yes. So a lot of companies, Breakthrough Photography is one, they make a light pollution filter for night photography. And essentially what that does is it cuts out a lot of the orange color range, colors. So what you need to do is combat that colder color temperature that it's giving you with a slightly warmer color temperature. So if you typically shoot your astrophotography around 3,900 Kelvin, you need to warm it up to like 4,500 Kelvin. That way you can start to get that color separation again. Okay, have I tried the DPP? DPP. I don't know what that is. It sounds dirty. Question, need to purchase a monitor with a wide color gamut. What do I recommend? So if you look over here, this monitor here, can you see that? This is a BenQ. And I can't really see it very well. This is a BenQ 27-inch, and this is a wide gamut screen. I do like it. It is one of the things that I would recommend is if you're getting a new monitor, do not get a 4K, because if you're getting a 4K, you have too much resolution to really tell how things are going to look like on the web, essentially. In order to see things as you need to see them, you need to have like a 2.7K or even lower resolution. So this is a 2.7K monitor. I like it. It does take some getting used to to adjust to seeing a wide gamut screen. Everything looks more saturated, which is kind of nice because you process an image, it's feeling a little oversaturated. Then you look at it on your phone and you're like, oh, that's kind of nice. That's pretty tasteful. It helps you stay tasteful. Let's see. Jet says, do I have a girlfriend? I have a wife. Dean says, Thomas Heaton has a wiki page. When am I getting mine? I don't know. One of you guys is going to have to write one. Please be kind. You got to Photoshop a huge moon into that, Nick. Let's see. Can I explain the concept of focusing rails for macro work? It seems like if you're continually moving the lens incrementally forward, each image will be a tiny bit bigger or smaller. I'm not educated enough in macro photography, but from my understanding, it's just to have a greater control over your distance and your focusing point with such a tiny subject. If you're trying to manually focus the lens, a lot of times they're too touchy. So you have little rails to slide your camera closer, which will move that plane of focus. Let's see. Do I have any tips for shooting during times of the year where everything is dead, no leaves, etc.? That's tough. If you live in a place where you just have brown on brown, it's really tough. I go through that this time of year as well. I think when the wide scene is no longer photogenic, you have to start thinking more abstract and more about the little vignettes that you can find out there. It's tough. I go through the same thing, and I just have to change what I shoot. How do I blend a seascape panorama with waves? So the correct answer is try to avoid them. If you have a long enough exposure, and a sense of timing for when the waves are in a certain place, you can use that to your advantage. I would say if the water movement is not super important, you just need to use a longer shutter speed. So if you use like a 1 to 2 second shutter speed with a panorama, it's all going to be kind of mushy anyway. So it's going to blend a little easier. Antonio says, fellow photographer and musician, what instrument do I play and what style? So I used to be a heavy metal drummer. So drums are my main instrument, but I play guitar and bass too. And I'm not only a metal fan. I actually don't listen to too much metal anymore. I've gotten old and lame. So actually my favorite band, if you guys want to check these guys out, write it down right now. They're called the Dreadnoughts. It's literally the best band ever. The Dreadnoughts are awesome. It's like a mix between polka and punk with a little Celtic, and they do like sea shanties and stuff, but they do it awesome. So check out the Dreadnoughts. They're awesome. Nick Page and Thomas Heaton photography on the Discovery Channel. They both jump out of a plane, land on site. Discovery Channel must take this idea. Who would watch it? Who would watch it? Let's see. Best tripod to travel with. So Sarah, travel tripods. That's a loaded question. So I've always traveled with just like my big tripods that I have. But I've started traveling with slightly smaller tripods. So I have quite the collection of tripods. I should grab them all for you guys. But the one that I travel with is a Really Right Stuff 2 series. So it's not the giant, 38 millimeter tubes. It's a much smaller tubing, and but it's still a nice, sturdy tripod. So you want something in that medium range, I think. You don't want something super big and super bulky and heavy because, first of all, it's a pain to get through an airport with. But you don't want to, if you're going on a photography trip, you don't want to show up with a cheap, crappy Me Photo tripod. A lot of people try to get away with taking the smallest and lightest of tripods, but you're better off to just have a nice medium one that is good for everything, and it'll be good for travel as well. Let's see. Deploy the elevator music. Sorry. Was the decision to specialize in landscape photography hard? I love outdoor photography, but not only landscape photography. I feel that professionally the right move is to specialize in only one genre. So that's a good question. I still shoot multiple things. But so for me, the transition was pretty slow in that, like, I just started phasing out things I don't like. So, you know, the first thing to go was like, because back in the day, I used to shoot everything. I was photographing babies and maternity and even did some boudoir. I did everything. But the first stuff that got phased out were the babies and the boudoir and that stuff. I still shoot some sports. I still shoot wildlife. I shot a wedding this year. I don't love weddings, but it's a hard thing to turn down. You don't have to specialize. And I know that that's contradictory to most advice that you get, but I think by continuing to shoot multiple genres of photography, it makes you better at everything. The fact that I can shoot NFL and shoot sports photography makes me a better landscape photographer, and the fact that I shoot landscape photography makes me better at, you know, all the other types of photography I do as well, because each one has a different skill set. And the more varied and the more diverse your skill set is, the more versatile you'll be as a photographer. And you can take that knowledge that you've learned over here and apply it over here. So, for example, I have a greater appreciation for the idea of the decisive moment because of sports photography. And I try to use that in my landscape photography with like waves and, you know, positioning of the light and positioning of the sun and that stuff. Yes. So Juan says, as a drummer, I must be sad about Neil Peart. He was one of my favorite drummers. Very sad about that. What's my favorite frame rate for video and vlogging? I'm always a 24 frames per second kind of person. I like things to be cinematic and not soap opera-y. I hate 30 frames a second. Let's see. What do I think of Jason Lanier? No comment. Aaron says, sorry, Thomas Heaton legitimately is the Bear Grylls of photography. You know this. He really is. What does that make me? Am I like the Todd Hoffman of landscape photography? You know who I am. Okay, we have a super chat. Mitch says, Nick, do I use a variable ND? Have I tried the Polar Pro variable NDs? I have. They are awesome, actually. Hold on. So I use them for video stuff. Is the one in here? Nope, that one's empty. I use them for video more than anything, but these are the Peter McKinnon guys. And not only is there 0 artifacts that you normally get from variable NDs. So let me start off by saying, typically I've always said variable NDs suck. And they usually do, because typically variable NDs have a whole bunch, have that figure 8 pattern that happens from over darkening with them. So typically I never use them. But the one time I have used them in the past was for video. So I paid money for these Polar Pro variable NDs. And not only is the presentation of these awesome, these are magnetic. So they're like a sweet case. Plus they come with this Polar Pro Defender. But what a variable ND is, for those of you that don't know, is this one is anywhere from 6 stops to 9 stops. And what makes these Peter McKinnon ones better is the fact that they have hard stops. They don't try to over darken. They don't try to be anywhere from 2 to 10 stops. It's a very limited range, but because of that, there's no artifacting that happens. There's also no color cast that happens. It makes them very, very useful and handy. Now, I use these for video, but I wouldn't hesitate to use them for photography either. You would have to have a couple of them because you don't really want to use any kind of filter thread adapter on something like this because they'll probably get stuck. That same is true for trying to stack a circular polarizer or something. You just don't want to stack something like these that have moving parts on them. It's better to have them for each filter thread size, but I've been very, very happy with them. And I think that the presentation of these is the fanciest I've ever seen. The fact that they come with their own lens cap, they come with these cool little cases. They're all magnetic. It's pretty damn fancy. But they are expensive. So there's that. I guess they better be fancy for the price, right? Oh, let's see. Let's see. Nick, when you have the chance, if you haven't already, the Hudson Valley in New York would be right up my alley. I would love to see that. Let's see. How do I know how many stops you're using on those variable NDs? They're so difficult to use. So these are not difficult at all because if I bust them out, they show you exactly what you're doing. But so hold that up. See if you can see that. You see that? Yeah. So there's markers there that show you exactly what ND you're using. Honestly, it doesn't matter as much. All that matters is that you're getting to the target shutter speed you're trying to get to, which is the whole reason you're doing this in the first place. If you're shooting video, you ideally want to, have your 1/over shutter speed. So if you're shooting 24 frames a second, you're trying to get to a 50th of a second. And these help you do that. Especially, I got them for my 24 millimeter f1.4, which I don't use as often as I should. How do I blend a sky and a foreground in the following night example? And then gotta wait for wherever it is. Let's see. How do I blend a sky and a foreground with the following example? Focused on the foreground with a spiky Joshua tree that is light painted. Focused on the stars and sky. So when I try to blend them, the Joshua trees and the Horion, so have those blurry edges. That is tough. Yeah, I need to think about that. It depends on how big the Joshua tree is in the frame. So one of the things that I try not to do is get too close to my foreground object that is going to be breaking that horizon. That's one of the things that you'll run into is if you're doing a focus stack in a night image and you get really close to something that's breaking the horizon line, like a Joshua tree silhouetted against the night sky, the problem you run into is the sharp version is going to actually be smaller than the out of focus areas when you're focused on the background. As you focus on that background, the focus breathing is going to make your foreground Joshua tree, it's going to make it slightly larger as it gets out of focus. That's a tough one. You're almost going to have to manually go in and transform the sharp version of the foreground and Joshua tree like 4 pixels larger, just so it's a slightly larger than the out of focus version of that Joshua tree that's breaking the horizon. and then you can blend it together. It's going to be a challenging one, but that's what you'd have to do is manually transform them, I think. Now, what question is from Nathaniel Miller, the winner of the tripod that I got to get sent to you. When you're planning a photography trip, what goes through your mind when you're going over the logistics of the trip? So typically I always prioritize where I want to be for a sunrise, right? So I figure out where my sunrises are going to be. That dictates where I'm going to be staying, sleeping. If I can stay a reasonable distance from that sunrise location, in a hotel, then I'll do that. But if I can't, that means I'm camping because I typically don't want to have a huge long drive before sunrise. Sunsets are no big deal to travel back to your accommodation of whatever kind it is. But typically I build everything around the sunrises just because those are going to be the most miserable to commute to and from. So I build most things around that. And then I work out where, how long hikes are, how long does it take to get to the shooting location from the car, how much scouting time do I need? And then that tells me how early I need to get to a location and how much time I need to give to myself. We have a super chat from AJ. He says, what's been the best method to improve composition? The best advice that I have for improving composition is to do edge patrol, right? So you go in and you figure out the purpose of the image. So I always use the analogy of like, okay, you're going to go home, you're going to tell someone about this scene, about what you're standing in front of right now. What makes it into that story? Are you going to tell about the beautiful sunset? Probably. Are you going to tell about the amazing gnarly tree that is overhanging the cliff? Probably. Are you going to talk about like the twigs and the limbs that are like laying on the ground? Probably not going to tell that person about that. So you use that to determine what makes it into the composition. And then you try to simplify it down to only the most important parts of that story. And that's kind of, the process of figuring out composition is figuring out what's most important to this story that you're going to be telling. Let's see. What editing software do I use? Hi from Australia. From Question Everything. So I use Lightroom and Photoshop. I use Lumenzia as a plugin. Mostly I use Photoshop. And the reason I use Photoshop is because it's the most powerful software out there. I know there's a lot of people that are excited about Capture One and Luminar and Skylum and all of that. I have a version of Capture One, but I've just been unimpressed with it because it's kind of like this mix between Photoshop and Lightroom, but it's not nearly as powerful as Lightroom. Let's see. Do I always use the Adobe Color Profile in Lightroom as a starting point? No. Sometimes I will it depends on the photo. If I have a photo that is a really high dynamic range and needs a saturation boost, I find that the Adobe Landscape is actually a really nice color profile to start off with. Gives a little boost boosts the shadows or opens up the shadows, a little saturation boost. It's a nice starting place. If I have an image that I'm going to really struggle with it becoming oversaturated really fast, I like to start with the neutral. I believe it's the Adobe Neutral color profile that is pretty nice as well. Let's see. When composing an image using a flippy screen on the camera low to the ground, how do I get the image clear on the screen? Do I have a matte screen protector? No, I typically don't have a massive problem with that. Usually you can kind of just turn it to where you're getting a little bit less glare. I mean, I'm always generally shooting in the early hours of the morning or the late hours of the evening, so I don't have much overhead light to deal with. So I don't have any kind of fancy screen on the back of my camera. I just try to find an angle that works. Lisa asks, is my wife into photography? Yes, she's a full-time photographer as well. She photographs weddings and seniors and maternity and babies and boudoir. She does a lot of photography. She's full time. So some couples at the dinner table talk about the weather, and we talk about white balance. Let's see. Question Everything says, sorry, I meant to say what video editing software I use. I use Premiere Pro. So because I have a podcast and I use Photoshop and I need a video editing software, I just do the Adobe bundle because I use I need so many of their pieces of software that it makes it worth it for me. How do I always look so gosh darn handsome? Says Annalise Page. I probably will make her laugh. That's my wife, by the way. Patty says, do you miss my A7R III? No, I don't miss the A7R III. I mean, I miss a little bit of the high ISO performance. That's it. A7R4 is a good camera. Felipe says, business question. For a beginner landscape photographer, how can one monetize his work? Can you go a bit into what I do? Licensing, prints, usually need an audience for those kinds of work. So you're true. I mean, right now, it's a very, very competitive market on the internets for landscape photography. There's just so many of us. There's so many landscape photographers that trying to break through is challenging. For me, the way I started was I started local. I had prints up in local hotels, local wineries, local restaurants. I did all local stuff because that was something where I could go down to the place. They would see my face. They would know me. And then they would start to associate my face with, the images on the walls. And that's something that you can do it's weird, but it's different these days. Like you can actually leave an impression just by them getting to see your face. And I think right now the easiest way to get started with monetizing is to sell locally. Selling on the internet, you would be a needle in a haystack for people to try to find you. And there's not that emotional connection of actually getting to meet you. But if you sell locally, they're going to know you as a real human rather than just a website on the internet. So I would push you to start trying to sell prints locally and try that route. The whole YouTube thing and the podcast and the education stuff that I've been lucky enough to have in my life, I don't know how I did it. It was luck. It's partially because I put myself out there and I tried not to be fake and phony when I did it. And I was very multi-pronged with my approach. Like I had one audience on Facebook, and then I also had multiple podcasts, and then I had a YouTube channel, and everybody knew me from somewhere separate. And then I added Instagram, and those were separate people. And then eventually they started to have some more overlap. But for me, it was kind of the octopus approach where I had multiple different places where people knew me from, and then they all kind of slowly grew together. But I don't know how I would do it now because it's a very saturated market. Aaron says, how's my new truck? It's awesome. I can't wait to get to use it more. I just put a light bar on it and a roof rack, got the roof tent on there. Going to be putting an awning on it soon. I'm excited about it. How do I license a print? So as far as licensing, I don't actually do any kind of copyright anything. I sell my prints locally. I did for a while sell prints through my website, but it was such a clunky, inefficient way of going about it that I ended up kind of having to undo that just because I wasn't home enough to make sure that the print orders got fulfilled. I need to figure that out in the future as well. Let's see. Thank you, Melvin, for coming. Logan says, when I bought into my gear, how did I balance weight, including class with sensor performance, micro four thirds, all that thought process for the actual decision. So for me, it was a little bit an easier of a decision because I was printing, I was doing portrait work, I was doing sports, and I was doing landscape photography. So portrait work and sports require good ISO performance because you're often shooting really high ISOs. I also used to do a lot of astrophotography, which also required high ISO performance, which basically limited me to, I need a full frame camera. And I also needed fast lenses. So that was what pushed me to a full frame camera pretty early. Then once you get full frame glass and you get used to the resolution and the high ISO performance, going back to a crop sensor size or any sensor smaller than a full frame, it feels like a step backwards because it's really hard to just give up, a stop and a half of ISO performance or whatever. It's very, very difficult to go backwards in sensor size. So that's locked me into full frame sensors. Does that mean you have to have one? No. I personally wouldn't shoot a micro four thirds because not enough resolution for one. And I just couldn't do a micro four thirds. I could probably shoot APS-C, but I'm sticking full frame. That'll always be a thing for me. We have another super chat from Dan. He says, what is the best advice for finding a foreground quickly while storm chasing? The best advice I have is to know the area that you're doing it in. That's ideal, but obviously there's going to be a lot of situations where you're chasing a storm beyond your area of knowledge. Finding quickly, you just have to have ideas ahead of time. Obviously you're going to be in an area with a certain set of circumstances. Like there's going to be wheat fields, roads, and whatever, telephone poles. And you kind of have to have a preconceived notion of what will work for a foreground. Typically, when I'm storm chasing, I'm just trying to find anything to silhouette against that big, awesome sky. That way I can tilt up and, have that object, whatever it is, whether it's a windmill, a nice lone tree would be great. Sometimes it's a grain silo, something to put up against that sky, because it's tough if you don't have that thing breaking that horizon line. So I'm always looking for that thing to silhouette against that sky. And once you have like a set of ideas that will work, that you can find quickly, oftentimes the main subject is the sky and storm chasing. So you don't need, the most amazing foreground or amazing, silhouetted subject. I can't freaking talk. You don't need the most amazing thing in the world to put against that sky, but you need something. And so you try to have this list of things that will work, and then you just drive in the proper direction till you see one of those things. Frank Silva, how's it going, man? Do you ever sell digital copies of my work, like marketing companies or anything like that? I've done some of it, and it doesn't happen very often. It's just really sporadic and random. But occasionally, it's more local stuff that, like, people that reach out to me. Sometimes it's like a bank that wants to use my images on their website. It's a lot of that kind of stuff, honestly. I've had the Yellow Pages reach out to me a couple times for local stuff. Usually it's those kind of things. It happens, but not super often. How's it going, Haida Filters? I've got some of their filters. Let's see. Opinion on Fujifilm X series. I don't know. I don't follow Fuji close enough to give a true, honest opinion on. Let's see. NorCal Adventures. What's the most dangerous experience while out shooting? How do I prepare for going out to shoot off the grid? Seascapes are always the most dangerous thing that I shoot because I'm so often drawn to big waves. Big surf is so dangerous. People die a lot shooting or just being around the ocean during big surf. There's been multiple times that I've been hit by waves that almost dragged me out to sea. And one time in that I'm thinking about, I was at a place called Cape Kiwanda, which is on the Oregon coast. And there's this particular sea cliff where you're 80 feet above water level. So I'm 80 feet above the water. And I stood at the top of this cliff and I watched the waves for solid 5-10 minutes. It was probably 10 or 15 minutes. And I was watching where the waves were going to. I thought I would watch them long enough. And then I go down to this particular spot. I'm there for not even 2 or 3 minutes. Hadn't even taken a photo yet. And this one wave hits and splashes about 15 feet above my head and throws thousands of gallons of water up this slick sandstone slope up behind me. And I'm just on this slope that goes down 80 feet and then ends in a cliff. And then there's just, sea cliff for hundreds of meters, hundreds of yards. If I go in the water there, I'm not coming back out. And so I have all this water go up back behind me and try to flush me out down this sea cliff. And luckily I was able to use my camera, the L bracket on my camera and tripod as a little bit of traction so that water didn't, sweep me out. But I was so close. It was very dangerous. And the most dangerous things that I always shoot are going to be seascapes. And it's so easy to get in trouble shooting seascapes. You got to be really careful. Yeah. So this was not before Annalise, but she was not happy with me when I told her about it. It was bad. And I was there by myself. There would have been no witnesses. I would have been a statistic. Do I need to be in quarantine for 2 weeks? Do I have enough food? So yeah, I'm in Washington State, which means that we have a stay-at-home order. We can go out for walks and we can go out for groceries and stuff like that, essential things, doctor appointments, but we're supposed to stay home. So that's going to last for 2 weeks. Got enough food, but we'll probably run out of toilet paper because toilet paper can't be bought anywhere. Will I update my essential Photoshop for landscape photography course? Really love my tutorials. Yeah, so what I plan on doing is... Sorry, I have the plague. Just kidding. What I plan on doing is just updating the things that have changed. So obviously content aware fill has changed. Transform warp has changed. I need to update some of the things that have changed in Photoshop. So I plan on just adding that to the tutorials rather than totally redoing it. At some point, I'll probably completely redo my Mastering Luminosity Mask course, but I've got a little bit to go. Sounds super sketchy. Yeah, I know. What is the R5 and the R6? I think those are going to be awesome cameras, but we'll see. We'll see. Do I come across very colorblind photographers? Yeah, I actually know quite a few colorblind photographers, and I always encourage them to shoot more black and white. No, I encourage them to try to keep their images fairly desaturated. Don't go too crazy with saturation because a lot of times they struggle with white balance big time. All right. What am I drinking? I'm drinking green tea. It's too early for beer. So Adam says, I'm looking to upgrade to a new system. Do I think I should go DSLR or mirrorless? I plan to shoot almost entirely stills. Curious to hear my thoughts. You gotta hold out for mirrorless because DSLR's days are numbered, and I don't think that there's going to be any more really good DSLRs come out. If you're wanting to save a buck, you could definitely pick up, 5D Mark IV pretty affordably. But I think that if you want to invest in the future, you got to get a mirrorless camera. I would hold off a little bit. Depends on what camera system you're on, but yeah. Yeah, I'm a mirrorless guy. I mean, it is like the future, you know, it's like a thing. Hey, Airman, tell me more about my chair. Well, I got it off of Amazon, right? Got it off of Amazon. I don't know who made it, but it's pretty cool. I think I spent $150 on it. Yeah. How have I found the Shimoda Action backpack? Have I tried the thicker straps? Thicker straps, I've seen them on Tom's bag and on Adam's bag. They're overkill, I think. The thicker straps are like really thick. A little bit too thick, I think. But I love my Action backpack. Having seen the 70 liter, the 50 liter is plenty. I couldn't ever find a use for the 70 liter. It's just too thick, I think. So the 50 liter is kind of the Goldilocks size. So I would go with the 50 liter if you're thinking about getting one. Danny Carey from the band Tool. Yeah, so Question Everything. Danny Carey is my favorite drummer, and Tool is my favorite. Well, they used to be my favorite band. Now I think the Dreadnoughts is my favorite band, but Tool has been my favorite band for probably a decade at least. All right, so thank you guys so much. I think hour and a half is all I got in me. I'm not, the energy level is just going down, but thank you guys for hanging out. If you haven't already liked the video, it'd be awesome if you could do that while you're here. I know I got to beg for likes these days, but thanks for hanging out with me. Hopefully I answered some questions for you guys. Take it easy, everybody. I'm going to end this. I'll hang out with you in the chat for a little bit, but thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Take it easy. Stay safe. Stay home. Stay safe.